महाराज आपके लिए।
The most frustrating subplot in House of the Dragon Season 2 has been with Daemon Targaryen. Since the beginning, Daemon has been stuck inside the dreaded castle of Harrenhal, and none of us could really understand where his story was going. Dude went through some brain-crawling bizarre shit, but with his last vision at Harrenhal, things are finally beginning to make sense. Daemon had been living through his own personal nightmare in the Westeros edition of Luigi's Mansion. He has been completely tripping balls by decapitating the younger version of his wife, going to town on his mother, alongside seeing his dead ex-wife and brother. Even though his plot did not quite progress as we hoped, at least the insurmountable wave of memes on the internet are hilarious. Watching such a strong character cower and crumble has been quite a humbling experience, but some good came out of it after all. The horrors of Harrenhal forced Daemon to face the error of his ambitions, so he could finally become the man Rhaenyra needed him to be. While it felt like Alice Rivers was one of the bad guys in House of the Dragon, it seems like this mysterious woman has only been pushing the rogue prince to embrace his destiny. In his last vision at Harrenhal, Alice takes Daemon to the weirwood tree and makes him touch it, which jumpstarts a series of moments that basically gives him a concise trailer of the major events we saw in Game of Thrones. Harrenhal has turned Daemon into a believer of prophecies, and now that he understands the Song of Ice and Fire, it clears up a huge mystery that the controversial ending of the OG show failed to address. So, without wasting another moment, let's discuss how Daemon Targaryen's vision connects House of the Dragon to the Game of Thrones.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
What exactly does Daemon see in his vision? Daemon's storyline in Season 2 has been the weirdest shit I have seen in the Game of Thrones universe, largely because its direction was always a frustrating mystery. Almost every episode showed him wandering aimlessly around Harrenhal, haunted by hallucinations of his past. The Witch of Harrenhal, Alice Rivers, kept tinkering with his head, bringing out Daemon's deepest insecurities. I think the most bizarre one was his unsettling obsession with his mother, Alyssa Targaryen, which was a good addition to make us realize exactly where Daemon's superiority complex is rooted from. Apart from the obvious character building, it turns out all of this was all leading to the very thing Daemon criticized his brother for, and that is none other than Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy. Right after Daemon touches Harrenhal's weirwood tree, he sees a series of quick images which only the Game of Thrones enthusiasts are familiar with. He first sees Brynden Rivers, the bastard Targaryen who goes on to become the three-eyed Blood Raven and a mentor to Bran Stark. Following this comes a quick glimpse of the White Walkers standing in the woods and a shot of a dead dragon lying on a battlefield littered with bodies, which could possibly be Daemon's own dragon Caraxes. Daemon then sees himself falling into a dark lake and drowning, which is definitely a hint of his own death during the battle above the God's Eye. And finally, in our favourite part of the vision, he sees a naked Daenerys covered in ash and holding her three young dragons. Sure, we do not see her face, but the scene strongly resembles Daenerys surviving Khal Drogo's funeral pyre in the Game of Thrones Season 1 finale, where her dragon eggs hatched and gave her the title of the Unburnt. This scene is a flashback, or, in the lore's timeline, a flash forward to the moment in Game of Thrones when she becomes the Mother of Dragons, which was actually foreshadowed earlier in the season when Rhaenyra Targaryen is sent away with the dragon eggs that Daenerys will possess over 2 centuries later. After this rapid montage, Daemon walks into the throne room and sees Rhaenyra sitting on the Iron Throne, which again cuts off when Helena appears behind him and says that it is all an elaborate story where Daemon has a small part to play. I think the meaning of his vision is one big jaw-dropping moment for all of us. Given that we are armed with the knowledge of what happens in Game of Thrones, it is quite clear that Daemon is being shown a glimpse of what Aegon the Conqueror saw in his prophetic dream, which he named as the Song of Ice and Fire. This includes the threat of the White Walkers in the north and the need for Westeros to unite under a Targaryen ruler on the Iron Throne to stop the army of the dead. Interestingly, Daemon also gets a glimpse of his own role in this prophecy because Alice Rivers had already told him on his first night at Harrenhal that he would die there, and the vision of the battlefield with a dead dragon, followed by a shot of himself falling into water, basically forces him to see his own end. If that is the case, Daemon's vision also revealed who he will be dying for as he sees Rhaenyra on the Iron Throne. This likely explains why he goes from wanting to rally the River Run army under his own claim on the Iron Throne to ultimately deciding to kneel before Rhaenyra when she arrives at Harrenhal with Syrax, Sea Smoke, and Adam. It is quite evident that the vision of the White Walker truly frightened him, and as Helena said, he now understood his role in the larger story. Does Daemon's vision confirm Daenerys as the prince who was promised? One thing we Game of Thrones fans simply can't let go of is our Khaleesi, Daenerys Targaryen, and for good reason. Her descent into madness was not properly developed throughout the series, and the show really rushed in to make her seem like every other mad Targaryen in history. But Daenerys was never meant to be just another Targaryen, as the House of the Dragon Season 2 finale reminds us once again through Daemon's vision. Daenerys is what many would call a hero destined for tragedy. No one knows why she was chosen to bring dragons back to life, but the use of blood magic and her status as the last Targaryen suggest it was indeed her fate. It was her destiny that led her to liberate Essos and conquer Westeros in order to reclaim her family's throne, only for it to end in her tragic death. Many see this as a character assassination, believing she was supposed to be the one prophesied as the prince that was promised. But Season 8 of Game of Thrones made the prophecy rather confusing and unclear, forcing us to rely on book lore to figure out the true hero. However, through Daemon's vision, House of the Dragon has offered its own perspective on how Daenerys fits into the larger story of A Song of Ice and Fire. The snippet that Daemon saw is literally one of the most important scenes from Game of Thrones, because it is not just crucial for Daenerys' story, but also for House Targaryen's history. This moment happened nearly 150 years after the last Targaryen dragon had died, and Daenerys achieved what had long been thought impossible by bringing dragons back into the world. The dragon eggs Daenerys received as a wedding gift actually came from Rhaenyra Targaryen, who had sent them to the Vale with Rhaena. Plus, when Rhaenyra sent those eggs, she called them the future of House Targaryen. If they really did end up with Daenerys, the meaning becomes much more literal. With a shot of dragon eggs in the flames just before Daenerys appears, it seems like House of the Dragon is further emphasizing that these eggs are indeed the same ones from Game of Thrones, thus making a clear connection between the two series. Now, the question of who the prince that was promised actually is, in Game of Thrones, has never been officially answered, and was an area that was left for the fans to decide between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. However, with Daemon's vision in House of the Dragon, it seems the show is leaning towards the idea that Daenerys was indeed the prophesied savior of Westeros. The biggest clue is the red comet that appears right before our unburnt Khaleesi shows up in the vision, which really acts as a direct imagery to clarify all the confusions regarding the Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, the prophecy literally mentions a bleeding star, and the red star that was bleeding is also linked to the Azor Ahai prophecy, which are often considered to be the same in the show, if not in the books. Even the red priestesses and followers of the Lord of Light we saw in Game of Thrones believed that this person was supposed the reincarnation of Azor Ahai, a legendary warrior who created the flaming sword Lightbringer and used it to defeat a great darkness. Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire dream again ties into this prophecy, with the inscription on the catspore dagger reading, "From my blood comes the prince that was promised, and his shall be the Song of Ice and Fire." Plus, in High Valyrian, the word for prince does not have a specific gender, so it could refer to either a prince or a princess. Rhaenyra believed herself to be the prophesied Targaryen savior, but that savior actually comes from her bloodline, along with Daemon's. Their second son, Viserys, ultimately carries on the Targaryen line, which eventually leads to Daenerys many years later. Since the prophecy is also connected to the White Walkers, this vision seems to suggest that Daenerys is definitely the princess that was promised, and for that to come true, Daemon needs to support Rhaenyra for the savior to come. Why does it make sense for Dany to actually be the Targaryen Messiah? First thing to note is, Daemon could have seen Jon Snow being resurrected from the dead, or, leading the army of the living against the Night King. But he didn't see that, did he? Seeing Daenerys in Daemon's vision seems to confirm that it was actually the Mother of Dragons, not Jon Snow, who was the prince that was promised. This has always been a hotly debated topic in Game of Thrones, as Jon also turned out to be a Targaryen and played a key role in rallying the living against against the White Walkers. Plus, it was Arya Stark who ended up being the one to kill the Night King. But House of the Dragon has put a lot of emphasis on the fact that the Targaryens need to hold the Iron Throne to eventually unite the realm against a great threat that Aegon the Conqueror saw in his prophetic dream. In the show's very first season, King Viserys shares Aegon's dream with Rhaenyra after naming her his heir, just as his predecessor, King Jaehaerys, shared it with him. Rhaenyra later passes this knowledge on to her oldest son and heir Jace, and while the prophecy was supposed to be passed down from monarch to heir for the years to come, it got lost through the ravages of time. As we know from Game of Thrones, Daenerys never actually got to sit on the Iron Throne. However, her decision to walk into Khal Drogo's funeral pyre was what brought dragons back into the world and ultimately gave the living a chance against the army of the dead. Apart from that, Daenerys' immunity to fire also gives us another reason to believe that she is indeed the prince that was promised, as it is a power no other Targaryen ever had. Does Daemon see the Night King in his vision? Daemon seeing a White Walker only reinforced the idea that Daenerys is truly the prince that was promised. It basically teased the great threat that Westeros is about to face and hints that Daenerys is the one meant to confront it. Although all of this is up for debate, as she did not directly defeat the Night King or sit on the Iron Throne, the vision still suggests on making the same connection. Aegon the Conqueror's Song of Ice and Fire has already predicted the coming darkness that would threaten the world, specifically the White Walkers. Through his vision, Daemon understood the full extent of the White Walker prophecy, which is why he says winter is coming to Rhaenyra in High Valyrian before he kneels before her. Now, this is not just about the future, it is also about the present. Rhaenyra is fighting her war partly because she believes she is the one destined to face this threat and unite the realm. But the tragic irony of trying to fulfill a prophecy is that Aegon's dream, which was actually meant to bring unity, has only deepened the divisions within House Targaryen and weakened both the family and the realm. The White Walker in Daemon's vision only pushes this agenda further, ensuring that even greater costs will be paid in the process. But it is not exactly clear from the vision whether the White Walker Daemon sees is supposed to be the Night King. In context, it does make sense, since he is leading an army of the dead, and the vision then shifts to the person meant to lead Westeros against them, thus juxtaposing the ice and the fire. However, visually, it does not look much like the Night King we know from Game of Thrones, and more like a "we have the Night King at home" situation. Even then, it still works if it is just any White Walker, but it is hard to be completely certain. However, it is also very interesting that this White Walker has silver blonde hair, which raises the question of whether the Night King was a Targaryen. As far as we know, the answer is definitely no. The Night King was turned into a White Walker by the Children of the Forest thousands of years before the Targaryens even arrived in Westeros. While we have seen White Walkers with wispy hair before, this particular zombie's silver blonde locks do have a more Targaryen feel to them. If the silver blonde hair of this White Walker isn't hinting that the Night King is a Targaryen, then why make that choice? It might tie again back to the theme of Aegon's dream and the downfall of House Targaryen. Instead of just representing the foretold threat, it might basically underscore how the Targaryens are their own biggest threat. At this point, it seems like the show is trying to tell us that the dream about the White Walkers not only predicts the coming danger of the Long Night, but also highlights how the Targaryens have consistently brought destruction upon themselves and Westeros. Why does Daemon see Helena in his vision? After living through his death at God's Eye and seeing Rhaenyra sit on the Iron Throne, Helena appears at the end of Daemon's vision, collectively shocking all of us. While the rest of the vision makes sense in terms of a future setup and how visions typically work in Westeros, her presence still seems kinda out of place. Although Daemon did order the death of her son, there is no direct link to the blood and cheese incident in this scene, so I do not see a clear reason for her to appear as a part of Daemon's vision or dream. I mean, Viserys, Alyssa and Rhaenyra's cameo makes sense to me, but why Helena It might be possible that she is having a parallel vision. While Daemon is seeing his own death at the God's Eye, Helena appears to be seeing Aemon's. She is wearing the same clothes in this vision as she does in a later scene, where she tells Aemon about his death. This definitely suggests that Daemon and Helena might have been shown similar, if not identical, visions. It is quite clear at this point that Helena has more power than we have realized. So far, only characters like the Three-Eyed Raven and the Night King have been shown to influence or break into visions. While Helena does not exactly do that, her role in the vision is rather unusual. I believe that there might be more to her than just being a dragon dreamer, and that she could be a more significant part of the story than we have been led to believe. It is also intriguing how Helena tells Daemon that everything is just a story, and then goes on to speak in the past tense while telling Aemon about his death. It somehow implies that she might have seen a lot of the future, perhaps even everything that is to come. Much like Bran Stark, who seems to exist outside the present in Game of Thrones Season 8, Helena also appears to be more focused on the future in House of the Dragon. Just as Fire and Blood is a documentation made up of historical accounts, she seems to understand that this story has already been written, thus implying that Daemon and Aemon's fight to death above God's Eye is fully unavoidable. Whatever it is, it looks like House of the Dragon is going out of its way to undo the crap Game of Thrones pulled by giving Daenerys that screwed up ending. Call me biased, but I always knew in my heart that Dany was the princess that was promised. But what about you guys? Do you agree with the connection that the prequel series is trying to build with Game of Thrones? Let us know about your thoughts and theories in the comment box below.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.